In May 2018, the United States Supreme Court struck down a federal law that had confined legal sports betting to a single state for over 2 decades. What followed wasn't a gradual rollout, it was the fastest expansion of legalized gambling in American history. Since that ruling, Americans have placed somewhere in the range of $500 billion in legal sports wagers. Today, 39 states plus Washington, D.C. have legalized some form of it. This video isn't about whether people should be allowed to bet on sports. It's about something the industry rarely explains clearly: exactly how the business model behind that $500 billion actually works, who it depends on to stay profitable, and what happens to the people that dependency falls on. How we got here. For most of the 20th century, legal sports betting in America existed almost nowhere outside of Nevada. A federal law passed in 1992, the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act, made sure of it. New Jersey spent nearly a decade challenging that law in court, largely because the state needed a new way to prop up struggling Atlantic City casinos after the 2008 financial crisis. While that case worked its way through the courts, something else was already happening underneath it. Daily fantasy sports sites, companies built around a legal gray area that let people wager on fantasy leagues with daily payouts, were exploding in popularity, especially on smartphones. By the time the Supreme Court ruled in New Jersey's favor in 2018, companies like DraftKings and FanDuel weren't starting from zero. They already had the infrastructure, the user base, and the marketing playbook ready to go. Within a month of the ruling, Delaware accepted the first legal single game wager outside of Nevada. Within the same month, 7 states had legalized sports betting. Today, that number stands at 39 states and the District of Columbia. The casino loses its walls. Before the expansion, a legal sportsbook in Las Vegas operated almost like a courtesy. Casinos ran sportsbook not because the sportsbook themselves were hugely profitable, but because they brought customers through the door who would then gamble on everything else inside the building. The menu of what you could even bet on was narrow: which team could win, the total points scored, maybe a futures bet on a championship. That model required something the modern industry has almost entirely eliminated: friction. You had to physically travel to a sports book. You had to bring cash. The casino had walls, hours, and a parking lot you eventually had to walk back to. Most of today's online sportsbook don't have a casino floor subsidizing them, which means the sportsbook itself has to generate the profit directly from the people betting on it. And that single structure changed, removing the building and replacing it with an app created a relationship between the customer and the business that barely resembles the old one. In nearly every other industry, a business profits when its customers are satisfied and come back. In modern sports betting, the business model runs in the opposite direction. For the sportsbook to make more money, its customers, as a group, have to lose more money. The math behind ban or bankrupt. Here's the part of the business model sportsbook rarely explain in their advertising. A study from the Southern Methodist University tracked roughly 700,000 online sports bettors over 5 years. It found that fewer than 5% ever withdrew a net profit from their accounts. The remaining 95% either broke even or lost money. But the more striking finding from that research wasn't about the winners, it was about the losers. Roughly 3% of bettors, the heaviest losers in the data set, accounted for about half of the total revenue across the platforms studied. That statistic explains something people in the industry have started calling ban or bankrupt. If you're one of the rare bettors who shows a consistent, demonstrable edge, what the industry calls a sharp, Sportsbook are legally permitted to limit how much you're allowed to wager. Multiple gambling industry and analysts and former professional bettors describe the same pattern. Accounts that beat the closing line consistently get flagged, then restricted, sometimes down to bet sizes as small as $10 or $20, regardless of how much money is actually in the account. It isn't framed as a ban most of the time. It's usually just a quiet message that your bet exceeds your new limit. Meanwhile, the customers who are losing heavily, are the ones courted hardest. VIP programs, personal account hosts, free tickets, bonus bets, deposit matches. This isn't generosity. It's targeted retention of the exact customer segment the business model depends on to stay profitable. There's a specific product at the center of this, the parlay. A parlay combines multiple separate bets into one wager. Every leg has to win for the bet to pay out. Because of the odds of several independent events all landing correctly are low, parlays carry the biggest potential payouts. They also carry, by a wide margin, the worst odds for the bettor. A standard single bet against the spread, the type of wager that's been the backbone of sports betting for decades, typically returns a margin of around 5 to 6% to the sportsbook. A same game parlay, by comparisons, can return a margin closer to 30% to the house. In the state of Illinois, regulatory data showed that parlay style bets made up roughly 60% of all online wagers placed in the state. This is the bet sportsbook markets the hardest, push the hardest in their advertising, and build the deepest profit margins into. Not because it's the most fun bet to make, because it's mathematically the worst bet for the customer and the best bet for the house. The human cost. Multiple independent academic studies, separate from each other, using different data sets, have measured what happens to household finances after a state legalizes online sports betting. Findings summarized across this research are consistent in direction, if not always identical in scale. For every dollar wagered on sports betting, researchers have found measurable depletion in household savings. States that legalize online sports betting have seen bankruptcy filings rise somewhere in the range of 25 to 30% in the years that follow. Debt sent to collections has risen by mid single digit percentages in the same studies. And researchers have specifically flagged increased reports of domestic conflict and violence tied to gambling losses within affected households, with the financial and behavioral effects concentrated most heavily among economically vulnerable households and young men. Behind those statistics are individual cases that have ended up in court. One lawsuit filed by the wife of a New Jersey man alleges that between 2020 and 2024, her husband, earning a salary of roughly $175,000 a year, lost approximately $1 million through a single sportsbook. The lawsuit alleges he drained his children's savings account and sold gifts they received for Christmas and their baptisms to keep betting. According to the complaint, the sportsbook owned VIP host contacted him by phone on a near daily basis, offered him free promotional gifts, and continued extending him credit and access despite state mandated requirements that bettors wagering large sums verify their ability to pay their proof of income. His declared income, the lawsuit alleges, made the scale of his betting mathematically impossible to sustain, something a basic compliance check would have revealed. This is not, according to the people who study the industry, it's the system working as designed for the segment of users the business model depends on most. The next generation. Gamblers Anonymous chapters across the country have reported a noticeable rise in calls and new attendees who are young, some still in their teens. Researchers tracking the demographics of online sports betting consistently find the heaviest usage and the highest rates of risky betting behavior concentrated among men under 30. Many of today's heaviest bettors didn't start with sports betting at all. They started with daily fantasy sports, the same loosely regulated products that flourished in the years before 2018 and moved naturally into sports betting once it became legal, and the same companies simply expanded their existing user base into a new product. For this generation, gambling odds appearing on sports broadcasts isn't an intrusion. It's simply part of what watching sports looks like. The marketing built around this shift that betting successfully is a matter of skill and sports knowledge, not chance. That framing isn't incidental, it's strategic. It encourages bettors to believe they have an edge that, for the overwhelming majority, the data shows they don't actually have. Betting on everything. The newest expansion of this industry isn't about sports at all. Platforms like Polymarket and Kalshi have built what they call prediction markets, letting users wager directly on real world outcomes. Elections, inflation reports, interest rate decisions, even the Oscars. The executives argue these markets do something valuable, that aggregating thousands of real money bet produces more accurate forecasts than polls or pundits, because people willing to risk actual money have a financial incentive to be right. There is a structural problem with that argument, and it isn't subtle. For a prediction market to be accurate, it actually benefits from attracting people with inside information, someone who already knows the answer before the public does. One of the field's most cited academic experts has said directly that participation makes these markets more accurate, not less legitimate, which means the people best positioned to profit from a prediction market are very often the people who already know or have strong reason to suspect how it will resolve. A Vanderbilt University study examining the 2024 election found that one prediction market platform accuracy fell to around 78%, and another to around 67%, barely better than a coin flip on some contested questions, despite public claims of superior forecasting power. A separate analysis found that a tiny fraction of traders, about 0.04%, captured nearly 70% of total profits on one major platform. Despite the language of investing and forecasting used to market these products, data reviewed by financial analysts have shown that on at least one platform, traders lost more money in their first 3 months than they would have lost betting the same events through a traditional sportsbook. And on the platform themselves, the overwhelming majority of activity isn't elections or economic data at all. By most industry estimates, somewhere between 60 and 90% of all activity on these platforms is sports, the same underlying product as a traditional sportsbook, wrapped in different language. Why nobody at the table wanted to slow down. Step back and look at who profits as this industry keeps expanding. State governments collect tax revenue from a product that generated from nothing a decade ago, and in some states, that revenue is earmarked for specific popular causes: schools, roads, scholarship funds. Sportsbook collect the structural mathematical edge built into every wager and an outsized share of revenue from the heaviest losers. Professional sports leagues, which spent decades publicly opposing gambling on integrity grounds, now hold direct sponsorship and data licensing deals with the same sportsbook they once kept at arm's length. Broadcasters build entire segments around betting odds because it measurably increases how long people stay tuned. And the newest entrants, prediction market platforms, have structured themselves to be regulated by a federal commodities regulator instead of state gambling commissions, avoiding the licensing fees, tax rates, and consumer protection requirements that traditionally sportsbook are required to follow in each state. Every party at the table has a direct financial incentive for the volume to keep growing, which means almost nobody positioned to slow it down has a strong incentive to. Gambling itself isn't new. People have wagered on outcomes for as long as they have been outcomes to wager on. What's new is the removal of every piece of friction that used to sit between a person and a bet. What's new is a business model where, according to the industry's own data, fewer than 5% of users ever come out ahead, and where the customers the system depends on most are the ones losing the most. What's new is that the device most people check first in the morning and last before sleep now also offers a wager on every play of every game, of every outcome of every election, every night of the year. Most people who use these platforms will never develop a serious problem. That's true, and it's worth saying clearly. This isn't a story about every bettor. It's a story about the system underneath them, one where the math only works if a predictable number of people lose far more than they can afford, and where the businesses built on that math have so far faced very little pressure to change it. A casino used to be a place you chose to walk into. Today, it's a platform that walks in with you, into your bedroom, your car, your lunch break. Whether that shift counts as innovation or something American society hasn't fully reckoned with, that's the bet still being placed. Not by the gambler, by all of us. That's motion and power. This gave you a clearer picture of an industry most of us scroll past every day. Subscribe. New videos every week or every 2 weeks. And if gambling has become a problem for you or someone you know, the National Problem Gambling Helpline is available. 1-800-522-4700.